Já, góðan daginn. Heyrðu, þá ætlum við að fara að byrja á þessu málþingi hérna Veggjöld. Þetta eins og þetta svona pínu skrítið, maður horfir hérna bara skjáin, maður sér ekki fólki sem að taka þá. En velkomin á málþingum Veggjöld sem ITS Íslandi stendur fyrir. Ég heiti Lilja G. Karlsdóttir og ég formaður ITS Íslandi. For our foreign presenters and guests, I would just like to say that I'm just going to start with a small introduction in Icelandic, but otherwise the seminar will be held in English. ITS sem sagt, ITS Ísland samtökin sem standa bak þetta málþing og ég ætla aðeins að tala okkur í örstutta stund, en ITS skammstöfun fyrir Intelligent Transportation System. Þetta bæði safnhugtak fyrir upplýsingatækni, samgangna og flutningsgeira, en svo einnig formlegu félagskapur sérfræðinga í tengdum atvinnugreinum allan heim. Greinarnar eru samtvinnaðar og hafa oft sömu markmið, en grunnstarfsvettvangur þeirra getur verið ólíkur, svo tengingar hefur oft skort á milli. Og ITS Íslandi vettvangur fyrir þess að geira hérlendis og tenging yfir í sambærileg félög erlendis. Og við í ITS Íslandi erum hluti af ITS Nordics sem eru reglífar samtök yfir sambærileg félög á Norðurlöndunum. En markmið félagsins að skapa vettvang til að styðja faglega hagsmuni opinberra og einkarekinna fyrirtækja sem og fræða og vísindamanna á sviði upplýsingatæknivæddra flutningskerfa, eða ITS, í samvinnu við opinberra aðila. Við erum 10 manns sem eru stjórnendur og meðstjórnendur í ITS og komum bæði úr opinberra geiranum og einkageiranum. Og með mér hérna í dag við stjórnartveimana sem málþingi Árni Freyr Stefánsson sem einnig stjórnarmaður. Stór hluti af því sem við gerum fræðsla og þetta málþing í dag liður í því að fræða fólk aðeins málefni veggjöld og heyra nokkrar reynslusögur erlendis frá. And over to English. We have a very interesting agenda today covering congestion charges and road tolls in Sweden, Norway and Scotland, as well as a presentation from the Transport Ministry in Iceland to tell us a bit about what has been done in Iceland and what future plans are. We intend to have a short break in the presentations around 2:15 for you to stretch, get coffee, go to the toilet or whatever. But the presenters will present uninterrupted, but you have the possibility to send us questions through the Q&A function or the chat function. And in the end, at around 3:45, we will try to answer all of your questions. So let the games begin. I would like to welcome the first presenter today, Bergstrøm Jonsson, who is going to tell us about congestion charges in West Sweden. Per, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lilja. And I'm also happy to be invited to this seminar. I will try to do my best to express myself in English, and the following half hour I will try to describe what has happened in West Sweden the last 10 years. Can you see my presentation slides? I assume that.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Then I start. Okay. Well, who am I? I'm an economist. I've been working for 20 years now with designing transport systems on both national, regional, and local levels. But the reason why I am invited here is that some 10 years ago I was head of a joint investigation team for the West Swedish Agreement, which includes congestion taxes in Gothenburg. Gothenburg is the second largest city in Sweden. Today I am a consultant, an advisor at Sweco, and we have a congestion charging advisors service team, and I'm the contact person for that. Why should you listen to me? Well, at the end it's up to you to decide, but I think some of the reasons might be that there are some striking similarities between the Icelandic initiative called Borgarlína and the initiative called West Swedish Agreement in Western Sweden, where I live. That's the first reason. The second one is that Gothenburg is actually by far the smallest city in the world having congestion charges. Designing congestion charges in a small city is something different than doing it in a large megacity. And there are some similarities between Reykjavik and Gothenburg in terms of size. Gothenburg is a little bit bigger, but not that much. And the image on your right top hand of this presentation is from a list that TomTom has about traffic congestion index. Gothenburg is the 322nd most congested city in the world, and Reykjavik is very close. It's 325th. And we have almost the same congestion index. It's 18%. In that sense, we have more or less the same problems with congestion in our towns. And we have done this in Gothenburg, the congestion tax and doing some kind of investment program for public transport at the same time. And I think there are some lessons that you better learn from Gothenburg, because we could have done that better. The image in the right lower corner is from the central square in Gothenburg. In Swedish, it says you must respect the public referendum. On the back on this older gentleman, it says he's a grumpy guy. And we have had a lot of political debate ever since we started the congestion tax 7 years ago. The presentation today, I will circle around 3 topics: the West Swedish Agreement, what is congestion charging, and the first set of advices to whomever considers congestion charging. 10 years ago, or 12 actually, there was a guy of...
sorry, Per, can I interrupt? Yeah. I think the black box...
you can see that.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
That's better?
Yes,
sorry. Good. The initiator of this West Swedish Agreement, they saw that we had congestion in the transport system, which was hampering the regional development and growth. It was supposed that Gothenburg should grow by densification, not by sprawling, and that the commuting in the future should preferably be done by public transport and not by car. And this was starting point of a transformation, making Gothenburg less car dependent, becoming a more sustainable city. The West Swedish Agreement, that is an investment program for transport infrastructure in Gothenburg region. It contains it contains 7 sub-programs, but approximately 20 defined infrastructure projects, which altogether was supposed to be cost some 3,000 million euros. And it was supposed to be starting at 2010, and the last diggings were supposed to be made in 2026. There were 3 different financing solutions into this. It was state grants, 50% of the total budget was coming from state grants. A small part from regional and local grants, and finally some 40% of the budget was supposed to come from congestion taxes as net revenues. And the idea was to collect congestion tax for 25 years. After a lot of calculation, we think we will need only 22 years, but it's still too early to say. The image on the right hand is cash flow. The red part is the costs and the blue one is the revenues. And you can see they are not balanced every year. So the agreement needed to have a possibility to loan on the capital market. And the last 5 years, the revenues was supposed to be much bigger than the costs. The last infrastructure project was ended, and it was time for the congestion tax to end the loaning situation. And in 2033, we hopefully will have done this. And so far, it seems to be working quite good, actually. A little bit better than this projection, which was made in 2010. The agreement was initiated in 2009, and the first draft of the content of this total program of 3 billion euros was a couple of months later. Half a year later, in April 2010, that investment program became a part of the National Transport Plan, which was decided by the Swedish government in April 2010, which is a 12-year-long investment program. Some months after that, the Swedish Parliament took the first formal decision about introducing congestion tax in Gothenburg. Some 8 months after that, the first project started. It was actually building bus lanes because we realized we needed to improve public transport before we start the congestion tax. And the tax was launched in January 2013. After a couple of months, it was raised a question that we probably need a public referendum about this congestion tax, a local public referendum in Gothenburg, in the municipality of Gothenburg. And it was decided to be done together with the general elections in September 2014. And the answer from the Gothenburgers was, please shut it down, turn it off. We don't like it. Some 55% of the participants in the public referendum said no about this. But in Sweden, local referendums are just advisory to the decision makers. And half a year after this referendum, the local parliament in Gothenburg said, thank you for the advice. We will keep it up and running. And that has been creating a lot of wounds in political life after that. We are right now in the period of the highest yearly consumptions when it comes to investment costs. We are one of the large ones is a railway tunnel crossing under Gothenburg with 3 stations below ground, and that is consuming very much. And the last investment cost will be in 2026, and the loans will be paid off in 2035. That was about West Swedish Agreement. I will now turn to the next topic, which is what is congestion charging. And I would like to start making a distinction between, and this is my distinction, between road charges and congestion charges. And as I see it, road charges are strictly aiming for funding transport infrastructure, but congestion charges are also acknowledging the push effect, trying to reduce demand for road space. And as a consequence of that, the authorities behind congestion charges, they promote adaptive behavior from car users. Road charges are not really doing that. And congestion charging schemes are often combined with supplementary measures in public transit, biking, etc., to create alternatives for those who doesn't like to take the car anymore. And here comes a couple of good practices in congestion charging. This is also from my point of view. To be called a congestion charge, I think it should be time levied, the fees, that in peak hours the levies should be higher than in off-peak hours. And that will help car users to shift going in other time, not in peak hours. If it's possible, you should have a bypass which is not charged for travelers which are only passing by the town, which also make it possible for car users to shift route and not creating congestion by that. You should carefully consider every initiative about discounts or prepay options. It always turns up that environmentally friendly cars like electric vehicles, etc., should be free. And you will probably meet suggestions that could we get pay a monthly cost in advance, and I would like to say, please consider that very careful and try to avoid that if possible, because if a congestion charge should work, every single travel needs to cost. You have to be aware every time you climb into your car that this will cost me something. It's better to not use it. You can make congestion charging by using multi-goals. It shouldn't only be reducing congestion. You can have more goals into the designing phase of a congestion charge. For instance, reducing emissions or funding infrastructure as well. You should avoid what's called toll plazas, where you have to stop your car and pay in some kiosk or something like that. It's much better to use free flow charging points with electronic devices. Otherwise, you will create congestion, not the opposite. Most of the 7 cities in the world that have some kind of congestion charges, they are the design is based on a closed cordon, some kind of toll ring that has to be closed. There should not be any free passes into this toll ring, and based on this ring, you can elaborate with some other elements to designing the best system for your local conditions. There seems to be approximately 3 years of hard work in planning and preparation before you can launch a congestion charging scheme. Faster than that, you will probably have to make shortcut, which will be a political risk in this way. And if you're considering congestion charges, please consider the Stockholm way of doing it. It was a very smart way of introducing, but also very risky, I think. They made a full trial for almost 10 months, and after that they closed down the system for a month and had a public referendum saying, if you like, we will turn it on again, and if you don't like it, we will put down the cameras. They made it like this in Stockholm, and they did get a positive answer from the persons that were part of the referendum. If we turn into a perspective of being a car user, and you will meet the congestion charge system, you have at least 7 ways to react on this. The first and the most common one is just to pay and continue as usual. But some of us will probably choose to go to use another time for my trip. And by that, reducing the cost for that travel. Some others will try to use different path to avoid the zone. A third part of us will try to carry out your cases elsewhere. If you live outside the zone, you will perhaps try to carry out your cases outside the zone as well. Many of us will try to coordinate our cases, not only doing one case with your car and then go back, but doing 2 or 3 or 4 cases in the same trip, and by that saving some money. Some of us will try to use other means of transport like train, bus, motorcycle, moped, bicycles, walking or carpooling to reduce your cost. And perhaps we have learned a lot now during the COVID. Some of us will try to choose telecommuting or e-commerce in a more advanced way than before. And there might be an eighth way of adapting, and that is by leaving the region for a better future elsewhere. I think we have at least counted for 5 families that have left Gothenburg because of their anger of us introducing congestion charge. It might be harder to leave Iceland, I think. I said I think there are 7 congestion charging schemes in the world. In this table, you only see 5. It's Singapore, Milan, London, Stockholm, and Gothenburg. But I think also Valletta on Malta could be described as a congestion charging scheme, and Oslo nowadays, since the last shifts of that system, I think they have turned from a road charging scheme to a congestion charging scheme, or at least closing up to that one quite rapidly. Perhaps we should come back to this one if there are any questions, but I think there might be some questions about revenues and operating costs. And if you look at the Swedish examples, in Stockholm last year, the revenues were some 150 million euros, and the operating costs were 10 million euros. In Gothenburg, it was 86 and 12. So the operating rate is somewhere between 8 and 12% in Sweden. But if you look at Milan, they are almost close to 100%. So it depends on how you design the system, but also what the purposes are. It could be made very efficient, also in terms of funding. The congestion tax scheme in Gothenburg, the objectives for that was to reduce, especially in peak hours, to contribute in reducing the environmental impact of traffic, and also to partially, by some 40%, finance the West Swedish agreement. As an addition to that, the politicians said that you should try to design a system that also should be simple to understand and easy to do the right thing. It should have high legal security and also possible to adapt gradually. The image on the upper right hand is all the different kind of shapes that we were elaborating before we decided which was the best one. We actually were elaborating, when we were find the last and best one, we have done 32 different shapes of this system, both in terms of administrative changes and also this geographical changes. The lower image on your right hand is the traffic flows for entry points. We have the traffic measures for every possible entry points, and during the day you can see that we have the morning peak and the afternoon peak, and we have levied the congestion fees to almost follow these curves. You have the fees on your left hand, starting at 6 o'clock in the morning, still in Gothenburg, with 9 kronors. That's a little bit less than €1, and rapidly rising to 22 kronors at 7 o'clock in the morning, and going down during lunch hours back to 9 kronors, and in the afternoon peak it turns up to 22 kronors again, to be turned off at 6:30 in the afternoon. Because after that, in the evening and in the night, there is no congestion in Gothenburg, so it should be free. The investment cost for the 36 entry places was also including the back office computer systems, etc., was some 90 million euros. But the payoff time for that, if you look at the revenues and operating costs, was just approximately 1.5 years. We use automatic number plate recognition system, both for identify the cars and in the final to enforce payment if needed. As I said before, if you consider to launch a congestion charge, you might have a look of the alternatives before you start the system. And in Gothenburg, we had some busy years between 2010 and 2013. We built some 90 kilometers of bus lanes, a lot of bike lanes. We made the platforms on the train stations longer, so we can traffic with longer train sets. And we also bought new trains. We expanded the park and ride system by some 5,000 new parking places for cars in suburbia. We introduced a bike lending system and also some new capacity for car traffic, especially to make alternative routes outside the cordon a little bit easier. And here comes some advices from me, and this is actually done together with Sweco and the Danish architectural firm Gjell Architects for a capital in Balticum some year ago. And the first advice that we gave them, and I think I can give it to you as well, is that if you don't have any congestion charging scheme in your country, the first thing you absolutely have to do is to understand the legislative framework, to find who is the official body that has the power to decide and to investigate and implement such a scheme. In Sweden, we made it wrong. We thought it was the Swedish, actually it was the Stockholm municipality that was the empowered official body, and they started to design the Stockholm system in 2004 and 2005. And after some legal debate, it turned out it can't be a municipality, it has to be the state, because that's how the Swedish constitution is written. So they had to leave things over to the Swedish road administration, and we lost a lot of time, and it created a lot of debate. So please do that homework at first to understand who is the right part to design and implement. I will not give you all the advices, so this is number 6. You must be very sure why you want a congestion charging scheme before you start to design the system. And you also need to have the capacity to communicate the reasons for why you want to do this from day one, because the question and the number of questions from both politicians and from the citizens will be massive. especially in the beginning. So if you haven't thought it through, you will have a rather hard time. And almost every city that has been into considering congestion charges, they step over the question about having a public referendum, whether it should be implemented or not. So have that in mind. It might turn out to be a question for a public referendum. You should be transparent regarding the revenues. How should the revenues be used? That is very, very important for the citizens to accept such a system, that they know that if they pay a couple of 100 kroners every month, they need to know where it will be put. It couldn't just be in the big black hole of governmental spending. It should be very closely described. It will be used for public transport, bus lines, etc. That makes it much more acceptable for citizens. Designing the charging system needs to be some kind of iterative process between designing and analyzing conceptual designs, but also to keep the politicians very closely to what we're doing, because they don't really know what it's possible to design, and you need to do this stepwise. It's a learning process, both for the politicians, for the civil servants, and also in the end for the citizens. That was all that I wanted to say right now. And here you have my contact information if you like to come to me tomorrow if there was something that I didn't express well enough, etc. Thank you very much. I now hand over to Lilja again.
Yes, thank you, Per. This was very interesting. We are a bit ahead of time, and since we've only one question, I was thinking of changing a bit and asking you that question right away, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
We are from Arnor here. He says, thank you for your talk and your distinction between road charging and congestion charging. Very important to internalize the externalities.
Yeah.
My question, you suggest a cordon pricing scheme, but new technology may allow the use of kilometer-based pricing schemes that also depend on the peak hours. What are, in your view, the advantages of cordon charging over kilometer-based pricing? Are there reasons why one should avoid considering the kilometer-based pricing?
You're right on that. And I know that Helsinki, for instance, they have been very close to launching a congestion charging system based on detecting cars on kilometer base, and there have also been the first decision of turning the congestion charge system in Singapore from using cameras to using navigation satellite system and kilometer systems. I think that the reason why we haven't seen it implemented yet is the perspective of your private life, that government should perhaps not collect information of where you have your car in every single second, and that's actually the reason for we use this toll-based system in Sweden, because the GDPR legislation doesn't really allow us to as authority to collect that kind of information. So it's more of a private integrity perspective. I think that the technology and the might be probably most efficient if we turn into kilometer-based systems, but the issue of integrity is trickier to round, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this answer. And thank you again, Per. Next one in line is Kjell Werner Johansen, who is going to tell us about road tolls in Norway.
Thank you, Lilja. I hope I get my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, but we're seeing the presenter view, so we probably have to change.
Like this?
No, it disappeared.
It disappeared.
I have to share again. It's the traditional problem when we're doing this remotely.
What about now?
Yes, perfect.
You can see it? Perfect.
Yes, yeah. Do.
Well, I'll start my presentation. I'm Kjell. I've been working at the Institute of Transport Economics in Oslo since 1988. For education, I'm an economist, and I've been working with road tolls, road charging, road pricing, not very much, but now and then over the whole career from 88, when my first project was to look into if it was possible to redesign the planned toll ring in Oslo into a congestion scheme, or at least differentiate the prices by time of day. It wasn't implemented because they wanted as much money as possible and decided to collect the toll 24/7. Also, one reason for that was it was a great opposition against the toll ring. The toll ring had to be operated with a manual option for payment, and then the toll booths had to be watched, be guarded 24/7, and then they could as well collect money. Over the years, I've done some quality assessment of toll schemes, also urban toll schemes in Norway. And the latest project I did was this fall, doing an assessment of future toll revenues in the 4 largest cities in Norway, due to some problems with they have to raise the revenues they have planned for the next decades. We have a long tradition of toll financing of road projects in Norway. This is an almost updated map of projects with toll financing. Traditionally, they have been set up for financing new roads, bridges, tunnels, and later years highways. The legislation has been based on the principle that the user of the road pay for the road only when he have benefit of the road. So new roads can be toll financed and be paid down by the users. We have had urban transport packages financed by tolls for almost 35 years in Norway. The first package with a toll ring was in operation in Bergen from 1986. The purpose was to finance new roads. Later on, within the legislation, with the principle of user payment, it was decided that also public transport infrastructure and bicycle lanes was to the benefit for the car users that paid the tolls. So the share of the revenues used for such purposes has increased over the years. And finally, in 2017, the Parliament passed a new bill that opened for using the urban tolls also for traffic management. So now there are more objectives for the tolls than the traditionals. It's open to use it as a measure to reduce traffic, reduce rush traffic, and promote zero emission vehicles that we have a lot of in Norway. But the history of tolls is longer than one should think. This is a quite new toll station. It's from the medieval Bergen, city where I grew up. They had tolls to get into the city for farmers and producers. I think you can even read of such urban tolls in the Bible, but I won't go through the whole history. When we move up to the 1960, it started to become common with toll financed roads in Norway. This picture is from the city where I grew up in Bergen, and my first car trip that I remember was when my father bought a new car in 1964, and I was sitting in the back seat when we picked up the brand new car to go home, and we had to stop and pay a little fee to these guys. It's a bridge centrally located in Bergen. Of course, it was expensive to have people collecting these relatively small fees. But later, as I mentioned, when we opened the toll ring in Oslo, it was based on manually payment in booths like these. Later, it came with electronic devices, so it was possible to pass the toll, pay the toll without stopping. And then a few years ago, the booths were removed and all payments, an electronic payment system was implemented. Of course, much cheaper, easier, less land consuming. You can put these up almost everywhere. And in the latest few years, a lot of new tolls have been implemented, or the projects have gotten more payment points of payment. Well, some figures. I couldn't get the data back from the 1960s, so I start in 2002. This is in 1919 Norwegian kroner. The financing from toll is the money that toll companies, toll projects have lent every year for road purposes or the purpose of financing these urban packages. And this is the paid toll. It's increased to around 12 billion Norwegian kroner in 2019. But these projects are lending money, and the debt has increased sharply and is still increasing this year in an accelerating speed, and amounts to like 65 billion kroner by the end of 2019, and will exceed 70 billion kroner from next year. The cost of this form of financing, because most of these tolls are collected solely for financing purposes, and of course there is a cost associated with this. General taxes, income taxes, other taxes to finance public spending has no marginal cost, direct cost. And toll financing has direct costs. The cost of operation has decreased over the years, and this is the average for all the around 65 toll projects in Norway. And this is of course due to that all the manual collection has closed down, and the companies have invested in electronic devices. So it's now in 2019 it was a little bit less than 8% of the revenue was spent to collect the revenue. It's probably decreasing this year and next year due to large extensions and renewal of the collecting system over the last 2 or 3 years. Our road was popular. No, they're not. Last year we had local elections in Norway, and a really big issue was road tolls. A very angry opposition mobilized, especially in the Norwegian cities. And a new political party was established. Here is from a poll. Do you consider to vote for the No More Toll party this fall? 26% answered very likely. This is a local poll. And actually the party, the one case party, the No Toll party in a city like Bergen, I think they got like 15% of the votes, total votes. And for next year's parliamentary election, they'll probably come into the parliament. But how popular are the road tolls actually? We have an organization in the Oslo area that they have followed the Oslo toll system since it opened since the year before it opened in 1990, and they have been doing annually. They have been doing a poll among the inhabitants in the area. And this figure just summarize the answers in 2 main categories. Are you mostly positive to the toll, or are you mostly negative to the toll? And it started out with, it's not surprisingly, the majority was very negative in 1889 before it came into operation. And what happened here? The popularity increased, probably due to that people could see results of the tolls, and they were told that, oh, we opened these new roads, and this is due to the toll you have paid. So it was fairly popular, but at a few points of time the system changed. In 2001, the prices increased more than the normal price index, and it was unpopular. And there were changes here in 2007. There was set up a new set of toll stations to get more money for a specific project, and the popularity decreased. In 2015, it was decided to differentiate the price between diesel and petrol cars, and also implement a small extra charge for rush hours, and it was unpopular. But for the first time the popularity decreased. This is taken in 2018. It was decided to extend the toll ring in Oslo with a lot of new stations, and the popularity sank in 2019. In the spring, this was implemented, and this poll was taken in the fall, in October last year, and the popularity grew again. And I think Per also mentioned the importance of information. This is also interesting if you plan to implement a system like this, is to inform the public. These two curves illustrate just one point, and that's that the part of the population that are well informed about the purpose of the toll and what the money are spent on are more positive than the others. As I mentioned, we have a long tradition to finance new roads also in rural districts by tolls. We have a lot of beautiful bridges crossing the fjords in Norway, and also some not so beautiful undersea tunnels, but that's another story. My point here is just that the tolls are reducing traffic. Reducing traffic is for many reasons a good thing in urban areas where there are pollution, noise, congestion, barriers, and a lot of things that we don't want to have. But in the more rural areas, to reduce traffic isn't a purpose. The purpose with the bridge in this case was to increase the size of the labor market in the western region. And the tolls, well, I think the bridge opened in 1994, and it was planned to be paid down in 15 years, but it was paid down in 12 years here. This curve is just illustrating the monthly traffic numbers of cars passing the bridge. And it was first when the toll was removed that they could take the full advantage of the increased labor market, and people could move out and live here, or people living here could work on a daily basis on the other side. I think I calculated this effect to something like 30% traffic reduction in this case, just due to toll, or increase when the toll was removed. Another good example is these days very relevant example is the Oslo package number 3. The Oslo package number 1 was the one I mentioned that was implemented with toll from 1990, and now we are up to Oslo package 3. The objective of the Oslo package 1 was to improve the road network. This is no longer the purpose of Oslo package 3, excuse me. The main objective with this package is to have a zero increase in private car traffic in the region, and have a minus or a 20% reduction in private car traffic in the municipality of Oslo, and improved, at the same time, improved accessibility for all. The actions that are implemented and is large. There are some large investments in new public transport infrastructure, conditions for walking and cycling. We have improved cycling network, both with respect to investment and standard, and also maintenance and cleaning and such things. There are still some road investments left, but that's not a big part of the package. But the focus and the money goes to improvement of operational public transport. It's a large package. It's financed by at least 50% by the state. I think in the last budget, or some consequence of the political situation last year, they are now actually today they have signed a new agreement, and the state will pay more than 50% of the large public transport investments. The local authorities pay something, but the heavy bulk of financing was planned to come from road tolls. 5.5 billion kroner annually from this year. This didn't happen for different reasons, but that's another story. I also illustrate the Oslo package, the Oslo toll ring by some maps. These stations here were opened and placed on these places because it was a need for space for toll booths, and also to place them such that they could get the highest toll revenue, also with the combination of maximum traffic and road space for toll booths. In 2007, it was extended by 3 stations here at the city border in the west. And this has collected money for more than for 30 years this year, actually. And it has some problems. Who had to pay? I didn't. This system covered about 50% of car trips in Oslo past these stations. And it had some effects. I didn't have to pay. I work here and live here, and I could drive without paying tolls. Was it effective? Well, I had a choice. This is a Friday afternoon 2 years ago. I could go take my car from work and drive home, not paying any toll, and paid and spend 37 minutes. Or I could take the faster way here, spend 24 minutes and pay 50 kroner or something in toll. Not very effective. Stations based on based on the need for space for these booths. So what did I do in Oslo? No, they increased the number of toll stations. I tripled it last year. This is wrong. It's from June 2019. Sorry for that. So, and this new system still covers only 75% of the car trips in Oslo. And the system, in other respects, it's not very complicated, but I still think it's too complicated with this differentiation. We have three kinds of stations. It's the old stations around here, where the price is differentiated by rush hour and not rush hour, gasoline and diesel, and now also electric cars have to pay a small fee. And then this is the old ring. And then it's the inner ring, new stations around the inner area, different prices, a little bit cheaper. I don't know why. Logic would imply that it was the other way around. And both these sets of stations, it's payment both ways. You pay you pay when you pass here this way and this way. And with the third set of stations is on the border, city border. Here you pay only one way, and you pay the same as in the old station. And there are some rules, complicated thing of these prices. We get 20% off if we have a electronic device in our car and pay by invoice. If you have this device in your car, you pay a maximum of 60 times on the city border where it's one-way collection, and 120 times in all the others where there are two-way directions, and you pay only once per hour within this set of stations, and separately 1 hour rule for these stations on the city border. Congestion charging, we have actually had that in Bergen since February 2016, Per, so you can add Bergen to your table. We have, I just show some the prices until March 2016 was 25 kroner in the Bergen toll ring. From February the same year, it was differentiated to 45 kroner from 6:30 and until 8:30 in the morning, and 2:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon by 35 kroner and 19 kroner off peak. The same rules as I mentioned in Oslo with rebates. And this we can see had a significant effect on the traffic volumes in Bergen, and it had a even more significant effect on the delays, or time queuing as it was called, calculated here. So here it's the first really congestion charge in Norway, I will say, is this one. There has been differentiation by time in other cities earlier on, but it's not at the same magnitude as the one in Bergen. Well, what about the future? We have a tradition for high taxations of car ownership and car use in Norway, but which have paved the way for strong incentives for electric cars in Norway, as electric car doesn't have any of these taxes. Since electric cars don't have any of these taxes, people are buying electric cars in Norway more than in any other place in the world. In October this year, 60% of new cars sold in Norway was electric, and 20% was plug-in hybrid electric. In the Oslo toll ring, more than 25% now of the cars that pass the toll ring is electric, and I think the total private car fleet in Norway that is battery electric is like 10-12% reaching. It's growing every month, and this has a problem. This is a problem for the public financing, as the tax revenue total decrease, and this is up to 2017, and the government has some projects that this will almost disappear until up to 2030 already, and these toll project and toll finance packages might run into severe problems as they have too many objectives. They have the objective to finance new roads, they have the objective to decrease traffic, and they have the objective to stimulate a more environmental friendly fleet of cars. And when they have at the same time will reduce the total traffic, there will not be enough cars left to pay the financing needed for this program. So this is one reason for looking into something else. Another reason is the external cost of car use. These columns are for calculated external costs of car use for three different types of car. So diesel cars to the left, petrol car in the middle, and electric cars on the right part of the figure. And each of them are differentiated by rural areas, spredt bebyggelse in Norwegian, mid-size city, large city daily average, and large city rush hour. We can see that the Q costs is the most significant part here. We have also a fuel tax on passenger cars motivated on external cost of car use, and this tax is the same, of course, whether you drive in Oslo peak hour or you drive in the northern Norway in the middle of nowhere. And the external costs are close to zero. The electric cars that we have discovered over the years, they contribute to noise, and noise from tires, etc., increase when the speed increase and take over for the engine noise. Local pollutions, a major component is from dust from the roads and dust from the tires and the brakes. They contribute, and they contribute as much as other cars to queue accidents and some tear and wear on the roads. So we don't hit the target with fuel taxes. So what do we suggest? We have over the last few years tried to discuss and argue to look into a smarter way to collect money than the tolls. I think also Per mentioned that there are systems, there are ITS systems that makes it possible to charge for car use based on kilometer driven, where you drive, when you drive, what kind of vehicle you drive. And these systems are more or less ready to implement. I think we have some challenges with protection of personal data that are solvable. I think they solved it in the Netherlands already 9 years ago in 2011. And it's important to find a solution where the car owner owns his data, and only the total payment, the total sum to be paid for each vehicle or person is communicated to the authorities or to the toll or road charge or road price collector. So, and we have actually convinced the politicians that this is a solutions that we have to go for in the future. So I think all political parties, with two exceptions, have agreed to look into this with an aiming to implement it sometime after 2025. Important point, and that's for at least two reasons. It's that it's more just that people pay as they pollute or as they cost other people external costs of queue and etc. And the other thing is that the revenue is needed and will be needed in the future, as all the car taxes are fading away, or we don't buy all that petrol or diesel anymore when we go electric, and you can't charge electric cars by the energy in the same way. Yeah. Just some old nice pictures of some Norwegian fjords that get some nice fjord crossings with very little traffic often. Thank you. If you have some questions or you need some more information on some of these aspects of tolls and road charges in Norway, you can contact me, and I can help you to guide you to find the documentation of different kinds.
Thank you very much, Kjell, for this. This was very interesting, and it's clear that Norway has a long history of dealing with road tolls. But I think we should take a break now. Well, we have 49 guests at the moment, so we are going to start again. Our next presenter is Tom Rye, who is going to tell us a bit about pricing schemes in non-Nordic countries. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm just told that I have bad network quality. I don't know how well you can hear me.
We can hear you very well, and also have a good view of your slideshow.
Yeah. Okay, I'll carry on then. Hi, yeah, I'm a professor at Molde University College in Norway, but I'm, as you can probably tell, originally from Britain. I work at a couple of other places as well. Many years ago, maybe 15 years ago or so, I wrote 2 or 3 papers on the implementation of congestion charging. Around that time also, I was seconded to the City of Edinburgh Council in Scotland, and did some work related to their congestion charging scheme and worked alongside quite a few of the people there. Their congestion charging scheme never went ahead, and I'll touch on some of the reasons for that in my presentation. Yeah, just a couple of very basic definitions first of all, and then I'll look at the Singapore scheme, some information on the London scheme, and then look at Edinburgh's proposals and why those never happened, and just give a few thoughts on acceptability in the implementation of congestion charging. So, you know, a lot of this is just derived from public information and from scientific articles. Some of the stuff on Edinburgh's proposals is derived from my own research at the time. So anyway, I hope you find it stimulating. Yeah, so as we sort of previously discussed, road user congestion charging, paying to use the road that was previously free, so not a toll road. And just a couple of other important definitions. An area license is a form of congestion charging where you pay to drive within a defined area, whereas a cordon charge, which is mostly what we've heard about today, is to pay to drive across a line or a cordon or through a point. And I suppose we did have some discussion as well of kilometre charging. but I'm not going to look at schemes that use kilometre charging because, to my knowledge, for private vehicles there are currently no such schemes. So I'll just look at those schemes that are in existence. Yeah, this Singapore, obviously small, very small, quite highly developed Southeast Asian country, with the peculiarities in its government and the way that transport and land use are managed and integrated by the government. So that puts Singapore, I think, in a unique position to both need to manage congestion, but also to be able to do it through congestion charging. And there's a few very very early results from their scheme there. They first introduced an area licensing scheme, and that was actually a totally manual scheme because that was introduced in 1975. So similar to some of the photos that Kjell showed from Bergstrøm, I think then in Singapore too, there were manual toll booths with people checking that people were displaying, that vehicles were displaying a license. But as you can see, it had beneficial impacts. Then electronic road pricing was introduced in 1998, and I'll just explain briefly how that works. So the area covered by the Singapore charging scheme now, the electronic road pricing scheme, which is not yet operating on a GPS basis, it's still operating using gantries and using something called an onboard unit in a car. It covers various points. I'll show you a map in a minute, but the city centre and some key roads around Singapore. It operates for these operating times, so basically quite a very long working day and also Saturday mornings. And perhaps the most interesting thing about the Singapore charging scheme is that the level of charge varies at gantries and depends on the traffic, and it gets reviewed every 3 months depending on traffic levels. So actually at the moment, if you check their charging levels, most charging points are charging nothing in Singapore at the moment because COVID has reduced traffic levels so much. So the objective of this scheme is very much to manage congestion. So if congestion falls, then the price falls. And you can find all this information on the Land Transport Authority's website about what the charges are at the moment. Vehicles have to be equipped with an onboard unit. This is relatively easy to do in Singapore because there's strong government control of vehicle licensing and in general strong government control. And also, as it's an island with only one causeway entrance from Malaysia, then the number of foreign vehicles can be pretty easily controlled. And yeah, you have to insert a stored value card into your onboard unit. And there's a fine which, in relation to the charge, isn't actually that much. And the impact of this is basically cut traffic levels and reduce congestion. And now the target is to keep traffic speeds to a constant level on different types of road. And that is done, as I said, through adjusting the level of charge for different times of day. And there's a map of the charging points, and as you can see, the city centre down here is where the majority of charging points are, but absolutely not exclusively. So there are other parts of the island where there are charging points. However, if you were to go to that website now, you would find that the majority of charging points are currently charging nothing, as I said. Right, just moving on to the scheme in London. This scheme is an area licence. So you are charged if you drive into the area, you're also charged if you want to drive in the area. You're also charged if you want to park a vehicle on the public road in the area and not even move it. The legal basis, and Per mentioned the importance of a clear legal basis, and there is a clear legal basis for this scheme. Apologies if you can hear any noise coming from outside. Somebody's rolling something down the street. And there's it just covers the central area of London. I'll show you a map in a moment. But it's a very, very small area in relation to the overall size of Greater London. And there are exemptions for using this scheme. So residents, for example, get a discount, disabled and public transport, the police, emergency services and so on, and also low emission vehicles. Although the discounts for low emission vehicles are being reduced, or rather fewer low emission vehicles are becoming eligible, or are eligible for a discount because of the growth in low emission vehicles overall in the fleet, but especially in London. When we consider London car ownership compared to the rest of the UK, if you control for all factors like income and so on, you still find a very significantly higher proportion of the fleet is low emission vehicle, and this is because historically low emission vehicles have had this discount for the London scheme. How does it work? The driver pays to register the vehicle on a database, and then cameras, automatic number plate recognition cameras, and some originally on foot enforcement checks each vehicle driving into or within the zone to see whether or not that vehicle is registered on the database. If it is, that record is eliminated from the database only if there's no record of payment, does the vehicle stay on the database. How much do you have to pay? Well, originally it was £5 UK. This has now risen to £15 UK per day. I said that it's payable daily, weekly, monthly or annually. Well, sort of it is. You still pay for every day that you enter the zone or drive within the zone. That said, you can pay by automatic bank account deductions. So you would get a bill at the end of the month for the number of days on which you paid, or sorry, on which you drove in the zone. And the charge does not reduce per day with any a large number of trips in the zone. You pay the same per day, however many days a year you drive in the zone. You have a chance to pay up to midnight on the third day after you drove in the zone, although it's a little bit more expensive if you pay on the third day. And then there's a fine system, as you might expect, and you can see there the fines are significant in relation to the level of the charge. It's a civil, not a criminal offence, though. And when the scheme started in February 2003, as I said, the charge was £5 a day. So you can see it's gone up, not in real terms, but in cash terms, it's gone up threefold since, and it's applied every day of the week and more hours per day than it originally was. Originally, it was just 7:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night, and working days, 5 days a week. And now you can see it's much more than that. And in addition, it's linked to or it's related to a low emission zone. So the same area is covered by an ultra low emission zone. So if you also have a car that doesn't comply with the emissions standards for that zone, you end up paying £27.50 a day to drive in the zone. So I think there are reasons why it's changed, which somebody might want to ask me about, but I guess really the key factor is that there's been an increasing need to manage congestion over time, especially recently. Also, there's been a need to raise revenue, and I think also there was public opposition when it was first introduced, and so as a compromise to the effectiveness, then the charge was relatively low and the hours were relatively short. But as people got used to it, then it became more possible to increase the charge and increase the hours that it operated. That's Greater London, and the pink zone is the charged area. So the whole map, you're talking about a distance of probably somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 kilometres across, and 30 kilometres from north to south, and a population now of 8.5 million people. And so you can see that the charged zone is the centre, enough, and you can also see there's a very small proportion of the overall zone, the overall urban area. And of course, the vast majority of trips, even before the congestion charge was introduced, were made into this area by public transport, walking and cycling. So the large proportion of trips, most people were not affected by, or negatively, by this congestion charging zone. And I think that obviously is related to its acceptability. Had it covered a much larger zone, then there would have been much bigger problems of acceptability. I'm not saying there weren't problems of acceptability. The London boroughs of Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea that were affected by the zone, they mounted legal challenges. There was huge opposition from them, but the scheme was managed at the Greater London level by the Mayor of Greater London, and so ultimately he didn't actually have to fully take into account those objections. He could proceed with the scheme anyway. But the fact that it's a small area of London is, I think, absolutely critical to its acceptability. What happened? The implementation cost £161.7 million in cash terms in 2003, so a not insignificant sum of money. But by 2017-18, again in cash terms, it was raising £230 million of revenue gross. After operating costs, that dropped to 171 million. So when it first started, operating costs were more than half of the cost of the scheme. And if you included amortized investment costs, they basically were equal to the cost of the scheme. But you can see that there's now operating costs have dropped to about 25% of the income from the scheme. Significant reductions in traffic, of 18% traffic levels, and congestion reduced by 30% initially, right? And increasing public transport passengers and much more reliable public transport, as you might expect. In terms of retail, because that's always economic impacts. Retail sales declined by 3% in the first year, but only 18% of retailers said that congestion charging was a cause. And when we look at the congestion charge as a proportion of the total GDP in the zone, it's about 0.03% of the total GDP. So you can think about, in terms of the economic impacts, and the economic impacts of people having to pay this charge are tiny, absolutely tiny compared to the overall amount of economic activity going on. So if anything, this is going to redistribute the economic activity, although there was some initial evidence that one or two large department stores experienced some negative impacts, but then they bounced back. In later evaluations, unfortunately, Transport for London stopped doing their very detailed evaluations in 2008, but later evaluation has shown the traffic reduction has remained. So in terms of the car movements per day, that traffic reduction has remained. There's been a massive growth in cycling, so that around about 10 to 12% of trips into central London are now by bike. There was also a growth in power two-wheeler use, but congestion has rebounded. Why has congestion rebounded? The Transport for London reason for that is that they took advantage of the reduced traffic levels and the initially reduced congestion to do some major schemes in central London that redistribute road space away from vehicles and towards pedestrians in particular, and also cyclists to a lesser extent. So, for example, significantly reducing the road capacity in Trafalgar Square, which was, when I lived in London in 1992, was effectively like a motorway gyratory, is now a far bigger pedestrianised space, but that meant reducing road capacity. So Transport for London, their analysis suggests that the congestion rebound is due to that. I have not seen any scientific articles which either refute or confirm that point of view from Transport for London. And then just moving on to Edinburgh, where I used to work, and their proposed scheme in 2003, which finally died in 2005 because the referendum was held before the scheme was implemented. The idea was to have 2 cordon charges with 2 cordons, and a maximum charge of £2 Monday to Friday, peak only operation for the outer cordon, all day operation for the inner cordon. The outer cordon was placed pretty much on the outer administrative boundary of the city, which meant that the vast majority of people affected by the outer cordon would be coming from other municipalities, which caused a lot of bad feeling politically, regionally, and objections from surrounding municipalities. It was predicted to reduce traffic, as you can see there, and predicted to raise money for transport improvements. The issue there was in developing and marketing the scheme, the city was never very clear as to whether its primary aim was to raise money or its primary aim was to reduce traffic, and it got a bit confused about that. And as Per was talking about in terms of acceptability, if you can't really communicate why you need the scheme, then that doesn't really help its acceptability. There's the two cordons, the inner and the outer. What kind of size is that city? We're talking about a city of 500,000 people. The distance from east to west there is around about 15 kilometers, from north to south about 10 kilometers. Worth a visit if you haven't been, and of course you're not going to have to pay a congestion charge because in 2005 a referendum was held and about 75% of people voted voted against the scheme. And a student of mine did a very interesting study of why people voted the way that they did, and one of his findings was it was related to people's understanding of the scheme. And basically you can see that of those who answered his questionnaire, there were a roughly representative sample of those who voted. About 40% correctly understood the scheme, but the majority misunderstood aspects of it. So some didn't get the charge right, some thought it was going to be charged in different areas, other people got the charge wrong and got where it was going to be charged wrong as well. So understanding of the scheme was poor, which again doesn't really help its acceptability. And basically this table here basically shows if people voted for the scheme, if people understood correctly, then more of them voted for the scheme than voted against the scheme. Although you can also see that even those who understood it correctly, a majority voted against the scheme. But basically, also in relation to benefits, if people perceived more benefits, then they were much more likely to vote in favour of the scheme, and no great surprise if they perceived no benefit, the vast majority of them voted against the scheme. So there's crucial lessons here in terms of communicating the scheme properly, making sure it's simple to understand, making sure yourself why you actually want to have that scheme. Otherwise, you can get into lots of problems like this. Yeah, acceptability is the key issue, I would say, with regard to road user charging. Everything else follows from acceptability. There are, people don't like to pay for what's been free before. You often get equity issues coming up, or concerns that the alternatives aren't good enough. And it was interesting to hear from Per about all the improvements to alternatives that were done in Gothenburg before the charge was introduced. It's important to do that and be able to show that you've done it. Conventional measures that don't involve charging tend to be more popular, but they're less effective at changing the way that people travel and achieving transport objectives. And also, as Per said, acceptability is seen to increase if the cash raised is spent on transport and environmental improvements, even sometimes things for car users. So you could argue that park and ride sites, for example, or even car park security in existing car parks can be things that help to boost the acceptability of a scheme. If the cash just goes into general coffers, that's not going to help acceptability. So if you want to maximize your chances of a road user charging scheme being implemented, you really need to agree why you want it, and you need to agree there's a problem to solve. So it's okay to say that you want it to raise money, but then that's got to be the real reason, right? And therefore you need the money to provide some alternatives and to make things better. You need obviously the resources, the people and money to implement, design and implement the scheme. It really helps, although it's not impossible if you're not in this situation, but it really helps if you've got one decision-making body. So in London, the decision-making body was TfL, Transport for London, and the mayor in charge of TfL I mean, the Stockholm case and the Gothenburg case show it's not essential to have one decision-making body, but it really helps. And related to that is the single implementing agency. It helps to have just one agency doing everything. Again, not impossible if you don't, but it helps. Provide alternatives before pricing is implemented and make sure you show people that you've provided them. Yeah, enabling legislation, crucial, and make sure it's understandable and supportive, because that's certainly not the case in the legislation in Scotland. Yeah, get professional marketing and communication people involved, really. You know, as transport planners, as we're often not that good at communication and marketing. It's not our area of expertise. Get professionals in to help from the start. They'll make sure that maybe some of the mistakes that Edinburgh encountered are not repeated. And well, there's a lot of the schemes certainly outside Scandinavia that have been implemented, or outside the Nordic countries that have been implemented, have had a political champion in charge. But that could be more than one person, but strong, you know, political support, so that the politicians don't just say, oh, we need a referendum. The politicians actually stand up for the scheme and say, this is a scheme that we need. Oops. That was my final slide I was about to show there. But that just really repeats what I already said. So, oh God, sorry about this. Yes, basically road pricing can be acceptable, but some of the things that I just mentioned on the previous slide will help to make it acceptable and implementable. Thank you for listening. I hope you did find that moderately interesting. I certainly found the other presentations very interesting and helpful. And good luck in trying to implement congestion charging in Iceland. I look forward to coming and paying.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this interesting presentation. Yes, and note taking on the marketing specialist, that us transport planners might not be the best people to arrange that. But our final presentation will be in Icelandic, and that is Árni Freyr from the Transport Ministry. So I'm afraid you, Tom, Per, and Kjell will have to just sit around for a few minutes and try to learn some Icelandic. And Árni Freyr, yfir til þín.
This is Anna from Verkís. We're way ahead of time.
Yeah.
So Árni is not supposed to talk until 5:10.
Ég tilbúin sko.
Yeah, I'm just some people are switching over to watch you.
Okay,
I've just maybe one question to our presenters. Can you tell me about some examples of cities that were thinking about implementing it but didn't go through? Some other examples than Edinburgh?
Yes, Hong Kong. So I think I'm trying to remember I think I wrote a paper about that actually with a colleague from Loughborough University many years ago. So Hong Kong is one of them. Bristol in England has also considered it for a long time, but their politics just have not been supportive enough.
Copenhagen has had the same.
Yeah.
They've considered it a long time, but the politics are preventing it.
Yeah.
So the main reason is often that they're just afraid of popularity issues, then to lose votes. Is that the main reason in most of the cases? Or?
Yes, I would say so. I don't know. What do the other colleagues think? Per, what do you think? You work internationally on this now.
Yes, in Copenhagen, it actually was a quite interesting scenario in 2011 in the elections. The Social Democrats said that if we win the national elections, we will implement the congestion charge in Copenhagen, and they won, and they started to prepare one, but the surrounding municipalities of Copenhagen, which was also run by Social Democrats, they objected. So it was an internal fight within the Social Democrats that the surrounding municipality won. So at the end, the national government put down the idea, and it hasn't been reintroduced since then. I also know that Riga in Latvia have considered to introduce a congestion tax, but they had problems last year with local politicians being involved in some kind of corruption. So and they were the champion of the congestion charge. So the idea died from that, I think, at least as far as I've heard. I now know that New York is not only considering, they are in full planning, detailed planning of having a congestion charging scheme for the southern part of Manhattan. I haven't heard for the last half year how that turns out, but the last time I heard of it, it was in full detailed planning.
I think we have two questions. Kjell, you wrote rebounding of traffic have some system implications.
Just a comment on that, because it's quite important, and it's also observed. And when you in one point of time implement a system like this, and the city continues to grow with population and economic activity, etc., that growth in traffic will continue on the same path as before from a lower level. So you have to watch this over time and implement new measures, and that's something that is done in London, isn't it, Tom? That the area of congestion charge was increased.
The area of congestion charge was increased, yeah, but then that was actually cut out again. So in the Labour Mayor, Ken Livingstone, who introduced the congestion charge in the zone that I showed in my presentation, in his second term, he extended the zone to the west into a somewhat more residential area and a firmly conservative area. And then when Boris Johnson was elected as Mayor of London after Ken Livingstone's second term, one of Boris Johnson's commitments was to take that zone away again. So this was very, very political, very political. However, the charge itself in the original zone, as I explained in my presentation, the charge has gone up over time, and also the charging hours have increased over time, and that's to deal with the rebound problem. Absolutely, yeah. And I think it shows that once you've got over the hurdle of actually accustoming people to the idea they have to pay, it then becomes easier to put the charge up over time. Yeah. And of course, there are some very specific circumstances at the moment which are meaning that Transport for London have to put the charge up because they have a massive deficit in their public transport operation due to COVID. So national government, ironically, national government under Boris Johnson has been forcing them to put the charge up to reduce their public transport operating deficit. Yeah. Even though Boris Johnson removed part of the congestion charging zone when he was the mayor. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. We have one more question. Is parking fee and stock management a part of the road charges, and how do they relate? I don't know if Per, you could start, or Tom.
Well, I think handling parking fees could be an alternative of congestion charges or road pricing also, but it's not really targeting the right thing if you're into congestion as the focus objective, but it might work more or less the same, actually, I think. What do you think, Tom?
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I've probably done more work on parking than I have done on congestion charging, and the reason that I did more work on parking is because nobody else was doing in academia. Was certainly when I started was really doing any work on parking. They were doing loads on congestion charging, and yet when one looks at the number of parking management schemes that are implemented around the world, parking management is it's a commonly implemented measure. There is greater acceptance for it, and there's also a legal framework for it in almost every country, whereas in almost every country there is not a legal framework for congestion charging. The difficulty with parking, of course, from an economic perspective, is that it only targets those vehicles that have a destination in the charged area, and of course it then only targets those vehicles that are using the paid parking, and the majority of vehicles that are parking, for example in central London, park in spaces that are not controlled by the public authority, and so there's no way of charging them. But I would say that certainly for smaller cities, and I'm not necessarily saying that Reykjavik is a smaller city, but for smaller cities, starting with parking charging can have some significant impacts on traffic levels, and so it's a second best in economic terms, probably a second best in policy terms, but it's a bit more implementable.
We have also an experience from Oslo over the last 10 years where the local government have increased parking fees and at the same time removed a lot of parking places from streets, so it's actually in a few years have become very hard to find free parking, and that is taking care of the rebound effect from the toll, at least. So we had a zero growth in traffic for the last 12 years in Oslo, and at the same time the population has grown on the highest rate for decades.
Yes, and I would maybe like to add one question to Per. I think you talked about the necessity to have a bike pass for those driving through the town, but then I started thinking about the Reykjavik city center, which is situated on a peninsula, as opposed to Gothenburg, which is like a more rounder city. How important is this aspect?
Well, I think you are onto something. It's probably depending on the local conditions and how the local road net is working. But for many cities like Oslo and Gothenburg and Stockholm, at least, there are some national and international traffic that passes through the city or very close to the city, and it is an interesting instrument to put congestion charges to the central routes of that kind of traffic, and trying to move them to a more peripheral route around the city. That could work, but my advice of that, in Gothenburg, we decided the other way. Actually, we are charging both international and national travels through Gothenburg, and there are no real alternatives for them, because we don't have a bypass ring road surrounding Gothenburg. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it could be good to give alternative of when it comes to route choices.
More thought, as you say, for the international traffic. To have a bypass than the local traffic. But I think time is closing in, Árni Freyr, so we will let you take the floor and prepare and put your presentation up, and we'll shift to Icelandic. Gjörðu svo vel, Árni. You're muted, Árni.
Gengur þetta?
Já.
Ok, heyrðu. Já, eins og hefur komið fram, þá heiti ég Árni Freyr og verkefnisstjóri Samgönguáætlunar í Samgöngu og sveitarstjórnarráðuneytinu. Og mitt erindi hér í dag er svona yfirferð á gjaldtöku á Íslandi og hvaða áætlanir menn eru með í þeim málum til framtíðar. mjög svipað og kynningin hans Kjell í Noregi nema þetta Ísland. En en ætla að byrja að fara aðeins í gegnum söguna og bara hvernig við litið til möguleikan sem að taka sérstakt gjald af umferð á vegum. Og látum okkur sjá. Ok. Allavega fyrsta dæmi sem allavega ég veit og í svona utan eitthvað sem mögulega gerðist á miðöldum, að það sérstaklega gjaldtöku og umferðarmannvirkjum frá 1893 þegar það var lagt fram frumvarp á Alþingi brúartoll til þess að fjármagna byggingu Ölfusárbrúarinnar. Frumvarpið var ekki samþykkt, en það var ágætt frumvarp og frambarlegt og innihélt meðal annars gjaldskrá. Það sem átti að kosta 20 aura fyrir lausrennandi mann, 10 aura fyrir klyfjahest, gangandi mann, lausan hest og nautgrip og svo 5 aura fyrir hverja sauðkind. En gjaldtaka í þeirri mynd sem við kannski þekkjum í dag, má segja að ég rætur sinna að rekja til vegalaga, nýra vega, sem þá voru ný vegalög árið 1963, en það var bætt við þessu satans síminn. Það var bætt við þarna einni grein sem heimilaði þá vegagerðinni að innheimta það sem var kallað umferðargjald. Og í greinargerðinni með frumvarpinu kom fram að eitt helsta atriði sem þetta hafi í huga gagnvart slíku væri hagkvæmni og hversu hátt hlutfall kostnaður gjaldheimtunnar væri af heildartekjum. Og þá var litið til þess að slíkt var aðeins talið ásættanlegt ef umferð næmi að lágmarki 1000 bílum á dag. Og þarna var líka settur fram sá varnagli að litla líkur væri til þess í náinni framtíð að til greina kæmi að nýta slíka heimild. En á endanum tók ekki nema 2 ár til þess að heimildin væri nýtt en í þessum sömu vegalögum var einmitt stillt upp miklum uppbyggingar áformum á vegunum til og frá höfuðborgarsvæðinu og Reykjanesbraut, Suðurlandsvegi og Vesturlandsvegi. Það er kannski eitthvað sem við höfum heyrt hérna nýlega. En umferð þar hafði aukist mjög mikið á stuttum tíma og á þessum vegum sem voru fremur frumstæðar á þeim tíma. Sem dæmi þá átti Ólafur Tórsvíst að hafa kallað gamla malarveginn og Reykjanesbraut ódáðahraun íslenskra vega. En fyrir Reykjanesbrautina þá var ákveðið að fara það var kallað dýrustu lausn og brautin var steypt. Og upphæð veggjaldsins var ákveðið út frá norsku viðmiðum þann ábata sem vegfarendur hefðu því að aka á bundnu slitlag í stað malarvegar. Og ég hef aðeins verið að grafast upplýsingar hvernig það fór fram og árangur og eftir því sem ég kennst næst þá virðist kostnaður við innheimtu hafa verið mjög ásættanlegur. Í rauninni bara eitthvað í kringum 5–7% sem reyndar að vera makalust. En þá reyndar ekki tekið með að þetta náttúrulega mönnuð gjaldtaka og ekki þá sem veldur töfum og samfélagsleg kostnaður vegna tafa er þá ekki með. En allavega, tekjurnar hins vegar voru samt sem áður lágar í samanburði við heildarkostnað verksins. Og auk þess var gjaldið mjög óvinsælt með Suðurnesmanna og sést meðal annars á þessari fréttamynd, það kveikti í tollskilinu. Réttar vegur á opnaður fyrir umferð og eins og sagði hann þá fylgdi gjaldið ekki Velasbrún og undir lokin þá stóð það hvorki undir vöxtum né verðbótum af upphaflegri fjárfestingu og á endanum var ákveðið að fella gjaldið niður 1972, talsett fyrir heldur en kannski upphaflega hafi verið áætlað. Og það var kannski þess vegna sem var talsett bíð hér með reynd aftur þennan möguleika, það er að flýta stórum ábatasömum verkanum gegn því að innheimta það gjöld. Það var ekki fyrir með tilkomu Hvalfjarðarganga sem að gjaldar aftur tekið á þjóðvegakerfinu. Fyrirkomulagið var talsett öðruvísi, það er svo public-private partnership aðferð, það sem við köllum í dag samvinnuleið og sérstakt félag og stofnaði framkvæmdina sem Spölur í eigu hagsmunaaðila sem fjármagnaði framkvæmdina fullu gegn því að innheimta veggjald að við ferði 20 ár. Og svipað og með Reykjanesbrautina þá voru Hvalfjarðargöngin umdeild og öðru hvoru birtust svipuð sjónarmið hjá íbúum norðan þeirra, kannski sérstaklega, á Akranesi og kannski Vesturlandi og að það væri óréttlæti fyrir þau að borga veggjald fyrir sína framkvæmd, á meðan að ýmsar stofnframkvæmdir annars staðar væri það ekki. Og upphæð gjaldsins svipað á Reykjanesbraut, það þróaðist í rauninni ekki í takt við Velasbrún. Það í rauninni var býsna stöðugt og hækkaði ekki þrátt fyrir að vera verðbólga. En hins vegar kom á móti að umferð göngin var umtalsvert meiri heldur en menn höfðu upphaflega gert ráð fyrir. Þannig að dæmið gekk fjárhagslega upp og fekk að klárast. Og þannig að gjaldbúnaðurinn var endanum fjarlægður bara með frið og ró og menn hafa bara katt á hjalla, rétt. Og enda hafa Hvalfjarðargöng síðan haft á sig mjög jákvæða stimpil og oftar en ekki nefnt sem dæmi vel heppnaða framkvæmd. Þannig að það er kannski ekki skrítið að það leið talsvert styttri tími frá lokum gjaldtöku í Hvalfirði þangað til að svo næsta hófst, þar sem er nú í gangi undir Vaðlaheiði, og sú gjaldtaka er náttúrulega talsvert öðruvísi heldur en hefur áður, þar að segja að hún er að fullu rafræn og byggir á myndavélatækni. Aðferðafræði við bygginguna var svipuð í Hvalfirði, þar að segja að það var sérstakt félag búið til sem átti að fjármagna og byggja göngin og allavega gengið út frá því að gjaldtaka eigi síðan standa undir afborgunum. Það er svo sem hvort að það muni nást, það verður bara tíminn leiði ljós. En fyrir þá sem bera ábyrgð á samgöngumálum, þá þeir fljótir að kynnast í hversu óhemju verk er óunnið í uppbyggingu og viðhaldi vegakerfisins. Þannig hefur Vegagerðin áætlaða fjárfestingar þörf bara til að standast lágmarksstaðla er yfir 400 milljörðum og auk uppsafnað viðhaldsþarfar sem er metin á eitthvað kringum 80-85 milljarða. Þannig að það er kannski ekki skrítið þess vegna er ónefnilega mjög freistandi fyrir þá sem eru þá samgönguráðherrar hverju sinni að geta flýtt mikilvægum framkvæmdum og gert meira heldur en fjárhagsrammar útbúnar af fjármálaráðuneytinu gerir ráð fyrir. Þannig hafa nánast allir þeir sem hafa gegnt embætti samgönguráðherra í meira en 30 ár ljáð máls á því með einum eða öðrum hætti að opna á sértæka fjármögnun í formi veggjalda, sama í hvaða flokki þeir stóðu eða hvaða skoðun þeir höfðu á málinu áður en þeir settu því embættið. Og bara kíkjum þess á það. Steingrímur J hérna úr Alþýðubandalaginu ljáði máls á því að Hvalfjarðargöngum eru flýtt og þau fjármögnunar hluta með innheimtu veggjalda. Og svo erum við hér með Halldór Blöndal og sjálfstæðisflokki, tókum við af Steingrími og hann alltaf kom Hvalfjarðarverkefninu í framkvæmd. Og svo er hann hér ásamt þáverandi borgarstjóra að jákvæðu fyrir því að flýtu og umferðargjöld eða Congestion charging væri skoðað, ekki síst með það markmið að hafa stjórn á umferðartöfum á höfuðborgarsvæðinu. Næstu eftir honum var Sturla Böðvarsson og hann var einnig þeirra skoðunar að það sem þá var kallað einkaframkvæmd en í dag köllum við samvinnuleið væri fýsilegu kostur til uppbyggingar samgönguinnviða. Hann lagði einnig til í samgönguáætlun 2007-18 að leggja að núverandi kerfi eldsneytisskattur er lagt niður og í staðinn er tekin upp svona GPS gjaldtaka sem eins og við höfum verið að ræða hérna núna eins og er í Singapúr. Og í þeirri samgönguáætlun kom fram að það ætti að koma þannig kerfi ætti að vera orðið virt á öðru tímabili sem var ekstra þá í kringum 2011 til 15. En eins og við vitum þá kannski gekk það ekki alveg eftir. Og eftir Sturlu kom Kristján Möller og hann var með nákvæmlega sömu pælingar, lét skoða sérstaklega möguleikar að nýta notendagjöld til að fjármagna vegaframkvæmdir. Hannabirna kom þar á eftir og lagði áherslu á samvinnuframkvæmdir og lét meðal annars stilla upp bestu mögulegum kostum til slíkar framkvæmdar. Svo var Ólöf Nordal og hún var sammála flokkssystur sinni að líta ætti til einkaframkvæmda, sérstaklega þarna í þessu tilviki þarna með varðandi Sundabraut. Svo var það Jón Gunnarsson. Hann lagði til nýja leið og lagði til stórátak í uppbyggingu stofnvega í kringum höfuðborgarsvæðið og það er það fjármagnað að hluta að öllu leyti með veggjöldum. Og svo er það núverandi ráðherra Sigurður Ingi, Framsóknarflokki, og hann hefur í þeim samgönguáætlunum sem hann hefur lagt fram á Alþingi lagt til talsverð áform veggjöld í öllum regnbogaslítum. En glöggir áhorfendur hafa vafalaust átt á því að vantar einn ráðherra í þessu upptalningu og það er Ögmundur Jónasson. Hann er eins og eini af öllum sem hafa í rauninni hafa verið samgönguráðherra á tímabili sem kannski hefur ekki alveg í opinberri umræðu verið fylgjandi veggjöldum. En hann var samt sem áður innanríkisráðherra þegar samningar gjaldtökuverkefnið Vaðlaheiðargöng voru undirritaðir. En á Alþingi samþykkti hann þá ekki þau lög sem heimiluðu þá gjaldtöku, hann greiddi atkvæði þar á móti og var eftir því sem kemst næst alltaf andsnúin. En nóg af sögum og kannski pælum að sé af hverju veggjöld og sérstök gjaldtaka hefur í gegnum tíðina eins og hefur komið fram reglulega komið upp, þó ekki endilega alltaf á sömu ástæðu og til einföldunar má segja að ástæðurnar hér á Íslandi sé megnum til þessar þrjár, það að segja fyrsta lagi er svona bara það sem kallar hrein tekjuöflun, þess að ríkið fjármagnar og stendur svo sjálft að gjaldheimtu endurheimta kostnað að hluta eða öllu leyti. Dæmi þetta er fyrsta gjaldheimtan á Reykjanesbraut og þetta fyrirkomulag hefur náttúrulega þá kosti að hægt að nýta sér góð lánakjör sem ríkinu bjóðast til þess að lágmarka fjármagnskostnað. Svo er það leið 2, það er að segja samvinnuleið eða einkaframkvæmd. En þá tekur einkaaðili sér að fjármagna framkvæma og reka ákveðið mannvirki í ákveðinn tíma og mögulegt er í þessari leið að heimila honum innheimta gjald af umferð sem fer mannvirkið til tiltekins tíma. Einn helsti kostur þessar aðferðar er að ef rétt er aðeins staðið telst hún ekki til fjárhagsskuldbindinga ríkisins og telst þannig utan ríkisbókhalds og það opnar á möguleikann á því að framkvæma umfram þar sem opinber fjármál annars leyfa. Það getur til dæmis verið gott þegar mjög stórar framkvæmdir á í hlut eða þegar mikill samdráttur í opinberu framlögum í málaflokkinn og mikilvægt er að standa vörð um grunnþætti eins og viðhald og lágmarksfjárfestingu. Og svo endingu umferðarstýring sem við talaðum talsvert í dag. Það var notað hérna orð tafagjöld á sín tíma lengi vel og sem er nokkuð bein þýðing á ensku congestion charging en þegar við vorum hérna í samgöngusáttmálavinnunni þá var markaðsfólkið sem þar kom þar að á því að það orð það myndi ekki vera líklega til vinsælda þess að borga fyrir að vera í töð og þá kom þá þetta orð flýtu umferðargjöld sem að ég svo sem ætla bara að halda mig við. Og eins og hefur komið fram hérna í öllum erindunum hérna í dag þá eru þessi gjöld nýtt víða nágrannalöndum okkar og með bara ágætis árangri og eiga þá helst við á svæðum þar sem umferðarteppur eru algengar, altså á þéttbýlissvæðum, borgarsvæðum og eins og er útfært þá í tollringjum eða area pricing eins og kom fram og en þetta getur alveg kallað átalsett umfangsmikinn innviðastrúktúr. Við sáum til dæmis þarna í Oslo þar sem það var að þétta hringinn og ég man ekki hvað 60-70 ný gjaldhlið sett upp og eðli máls samkvæmt fara gríðarmargir í gegnum svona hringi á hverjum degi, jafnvel mörg og svona dag og gjaldskrár eru oftar en ekki breytileg menn það leiðilega að hafa áhrif á umferð, dreifa henni betur milli háanna og lágannatíma. Og skjótvirkar aðferð til þess að hafa áhrif á ferðavenjur er vandfundin, en að samaskapi er hún umdeild og vekur spurningar jafnræði og sanngirni. Í apríl 2019 skilaði sérstakur starfshópur af sér skýrslu með varðandi vegaframkvæmdir og leiðir til fjármögnunar. Hópnum hafði verið falið eftirfarandi. Það er fyrsta lagi að stilla upp útfærslum af mögulegum fjármögnunarleiðum til þess að standa straum af kostnaði við fjárfestingar í samgöngukerfinu, stilla upp sviðsmyndum af svokölluðu flýtigjaldi sem það var talsvert rætt, sem var þá þessi gjaldtaka sem Jón Gunnarsson kannski var að leggja upp með fyrir einstaka stærri framkvæmdir og svo endingu stilla upp tillögum það hvernig mætti standa að innheimtugjaldana, til dæmis hvort hagstætt væri að stofna eitt eða fleiri félög gjaldtökuna og hvert hlutverk viðkomandi félags ætti að vera. Og eins og sést á meginmarkmiðum hópsins var talsvert áhersla á að þarna kæmi fram útfærð tillaga að veggjaldakerfi í rauninni. Og hópurinn skoðaði alls kyns útfærslur að breytilegri fjármögnun og leitaði þar í þeirri vinnu ekki síst til Noregs. Niðurstaða hópsins var samt á endanum sú að rauninni væri hagkvæmast út frá bara heildarkostnaði verkefna að ríkið fjármagnaði verkin sjálf með hefðbundnum hætti væri svigrúm til þess að sjálfsögðu. Ein helsta rök sem þar að baki er að það myndi hafa lágmarks fjármagnskostnað í för með sér. Ef það væri ekki í boði, væri venlegast að stofna væri opinbert hlutafélag framkvæmdir sem fjármagna þær og innheimti síðan veggjöld. Sú aðferð hefur þó þann galla að allar lántökur slíks félags myndu teljast til ríkisskulda og því háða því svigrúmi sem er til aukinnar lántöku hjá ríkissjóði. Og það svigrúm byggist á fjármálastefnu, ríkjandi fjármálastefnu hverju sinni. Samvinnuleiðin er alltaf fær, en hún myndi þá henta best í stórum og vel skilgreintum nýframkvæmdum og þá voru nefnt sérstaklega til söguna Sundabraut og tvöföldun Hvalfjarðarganga. Hópurinn lagði til að gjaldtakan miðaðist við að standa undir kostnaði við hverja framkvæmd fyrir sig. Það þýðir að gjaldin á einu stað væri ekki notað til að standa undir framkvæmdum á öðrum stað. Og það meðal annars ein helsta rök sem þessa gjaldtaka geti talið sem þjónustugjald, sem félagið hefði þá umræðarétt yfir. Þetta kemur inn á það sem að Per var að tala áðan varðandi svona lögfræðilegan grunn þessuna gjaldtöku. Og þetta mikilvægur punktur. En hin leiðin þá að gjaldið sé skilgreint sem skattur. Og þjónustugjald miðað við að það sé gjald fyrir veitta þjónustu á vegi væri það þá vegurinn sjálfur. Ef svona gjaldtaka stillt upp þannig að hún sé jafnaðargjald á mörgum stöðum eða ef hún sveigjanleg eða breytileg innan dags, eins og hugmyndin með flýtu umferðargjöldum, þá telst það vera skattur. Og sem skattur þá rennur upp í ríkissjóð. Og Alþingi tekur síðan afstöðu til þess á hverju ári með fjárlögum hve há upphæð gjaldsins rennur tilbaka. Og það býr óneitanlega til áhættuþátt þrátt fyrir öll mögulega loforð áður. En að endingu lagði hópurinn til að nýtt væri nýjasta tækni í innheimtu, og tryggt væri að kostnaður við innheimtuna væri ávallt haldið í lágmarki, og lagði hópurinn til að miðað væri við að kostnaður við innheimtu væri sem hlutfall innheimtra tekja væri ekki hærri en 10%. Og hérna graf sem úr skýrslunni. Kjell sýndi okkur nú nýrri tölur, en þetta segir þetta ákveðna sögu. Þetta sýnir að í Noregi hefur kostnaður við innheimtu verið að fara lækkandi og komin svolítið undir 10%. Og innheimta veggjalda, jafnvel þó hún sé rafræn, hún kostar. Og það ekki bara að kaupa myndavélum og uppsýningarkostnaður sem skipta máli. Það ekki síst eftirvinnsla á innheimtugjöld sem skipta það máli. Eftir því sem innheimtutekjur eru hærri skiptist stofnkostnaður, það sem fastur kostnaður minna máli, og hann dreifist af fleiri. Og raunkostnaður við hverja færslu situr þá eftir. Með öðrum orðum, hlutfallið lækkar eftir því sem gjaldið hærra og eftir því sem fleiri borgar. Og eins og þið sjáið frá þessari mynd sem líka frá Noregi og var í sömu skýrslu, að eftir því sem færri ökutæki fara mannvirkin þá raunkostnaður við hverja færslu, hann meiri. Og þarna í framkvæmdunum á þeim stöðum þar sem umferðin hvað minnst, þá kostnaður við hverja færslu að fer alveg upp í 10 norska krónur sem eitthvað í kringum 1500 íslenskar. Og í Noregi miðað við að þegar árdagsumferð hefur náð 10 ökutækjum kostnaður við hverja færslu á velflestum stöðum komin undir 2 norskar krónur, það sem myndi vera 25-30 krónur íslenskar. Þá erum við komin í það að ef að veggjaldið þá stærri kringum 300-400 krónur, að ef þá kostnaður við hverja færslu 25-30, þá erum við komin vel undir 10%, sem þýðir að það dæma ætti að ganga upp. En víkur nú sögunni að gildandi samgönguáætlun sem gildir til ásins 2034 og var samþykkt á Alþingi síðasta sumar. Og í henni koma fram áform þrenns konar veggjöld, eða sérstaka fjármögnun, og í fyrsta það samvinnuverkefni, samgöngusáttmáli og svo jarðgangaáætlun. Í fyrsta lagi getum við, ef við ræðum samvinnuverkefni, þá í áætluninni talin til 6 verkefni sem lagt til að unnin verði samkvæmt samvinnuleið. Og í 4 þeirra gert ráð fyrir að fjármögnun einkaaðila verði að fullu, en í 2 gert ráð fyrir að hluti fjármögnunar verði við opinberu framlagi. Sama dag og samgönguáætlun var samþykkt á Alþingi voru samþykkt þessi lög sem sjást hérna í horninu samvinnuverkefni samgönguframkvæmdir. Og í þeim einmitt stillt upp rammanum fyrir þessar framkvæmdir. Og í 3. grein laganna kemur fram að heimilt að fjármagna samvinnuverkefni að hluta eða öllu leyti með gjaldtöku af umferð mannvirki sem samvinnuverkefnina til. Það kemur einnig fram að veggjaldi getur staðið straum af stofnkostnaði sem og viðhalds- og rekstrarkostnaði og að gjaldtaka hefjist ekki fyrir en opnað hefur verið fyrir almenna umferð og hún standi ekki lengur en 30 ár. Í lögunum segir ennfremur að innheimtan sjálf geti verið í höndum vegagerðarinnar eða einkaaðila. Þannig að það talsverður sveigjanleiki. Í annar stað svo samgöngusáttmálinn og hvað sem einhverjum umræðum með yfirlýsingum síðan hann var undirritaður líður, þá stendur í sáttmála sjálfum að helmingur fjármögnunar þeirra framkvæmda sem hann boðar sé í formi svokallaðra flýti og umferðargjalda. Og ljóst er af texta samkomulagsins að útfærsla slíks gjald liggur ekki fyrir að svo stöddu. Og þar segir þó að gert sé ráð fyrir að við útfærslu þeirra verði horft til þess að létta á bílaumferð, draga úr útblæstri og mengun frá umferð, einkum á álagstímum, og þá miði á útfærslan við að því að styðja við breyttar ferðavenjur til og frá vinnu á háannatíma. Og miðað við þessa forsendur er ljóst að gjaldið þyrfti að vera breytilegt, hærra á háannatíma og lægra þess á milli. Og ef hort væri á útfærslu Svía í Gautaborg og Stokkhólmi mætti einnig gera ráð fyrir að á nóttunni og helgar væri jafnvel gjaldfrjálst. Mögulega væri líka hægt að innbyggja í þetta einhverja hvata til þess að umbuna grænum ökutækjum. En það er þó ljóst að allur þessi breytileiki og sú staðreynd að gjald inn á einu stað fer í að fjármagna innviði víðar á svæðinu, að þessi gjaldtaka yrði að vera í formi skattheimtu. Og það þýðir að hún yrði á forræði fjármála- og efnahagsráðuneytisins og að áður en hún yrði lögð á, yrði að festa í lög heimildir fyrir henni, sem þýðir að samþykkja Alþingis er nauðsynlegt. Í þriðja lagi má svo nefna, jarðgangaáætlunina, en í greinargerð með samgönguáætlun segir að stefnt sé að gjaldtöku af umferð í jarðgöngum á Íslandi. Sú innheimta muni fjármagna rekstur og viðhald ganganna sem og að standa undir því sem uppávantar í framkvæmdakostnað. En í áætluninni er gert ráð fyrir að bein framlög ríkisins verði helmingur framkvæmdakostnaðar. Þessi gjaldheimta hefur ekki verið útfærð nánar en það er á döfinni að gera það. Svo, hvað ber framtíðin skauti sér? Það er í gangi endurskoðun á skattlagningu ríkisins á umferð ökutækja og það sem kallað var þá endurskoðun eins og víða annars staðar í heiminum er ekki síst sú staðreynd að sífellt fleiri ökutæki eru hætt að nota venjulegt jarðefnært eldsneyti og því fer skattstofn eldsneytisgjalda rýrnandi. Röksemdin fyrir því að umferð sé skattlögð er í grunninn sá að vegfarendur greiði fyrir það sem þeir gera og nota. Beinn kostnaður sem samfélagið reiðir af hendi er svo við getum áhyggjulaust ekið er uppbygging innviða, viðhald þeirra og þjónusta. Svo er það hitt sem samfélagið borgar með óbeinum hætti, það er óbeinar afleiðingar umferðar og þar má telja til hluti eins og slys á fólki, tafir, umferðar, áhrif mengunar á heilsu og lífríki, auka annar áhrifa svo sem í formi hljóðmengunar og hindrunar áhrifa. Og þannig að út frá hagfræðilegu sjónarmiði væri besta mögulega kerfið þannig gerði gert að það myndi ná yfir öll þessi atriði og við myndum greiða í samræmi við áhrif okkar á þau öll. Það er þá ljóst að slíkt kerfi þyrfti að byggja á ansi mörgum breytum og upplýsingum og ekki síst í rauninni vitneskju bæði stað og stundu vegfarenda. Ýmsar tillögur hafa verið upp lausnir en flestar hafa þær bæði kost og galla. Það eru mörg sjónarmið sem slík gjaldtaka þarf að uppfylla svo gangi upp. Það fyrsta verður að vera sanngjörn og má helst ekki mismuna fólki eftir hvar það býr og því myndi segja að það er einn helsti galli gjaldtökukerfa sem byggja á innheimtustöðvum, það sem er einhver lína og það er þá bara þeir sem fara í gegn sem borga og þá fer að skipta máli hvorum megin við línuna fólk býr. Og í annars stað þarf náttúrulega að vera áreiðanleg og þau gögn sem byggir á verða að vera óviðfengjanleg og helst á ekki að vera hægt að svindla. Að endingu er mikilvægt að líta til innheimtukostnaðar eða transaction cost við innheimtuna og allir innheimtu fylgir einhver kostnaður og mikilvægt er að hann sé sem lægstur. Núverandi kerfi eldsneytisgjalda er dæmi mjög effektífa gjaldtöku. Það nánast ógjörningur að svindla og innheimta hennar er mjög ódýr fyrir ríkið. Og eins og við framvegu komið þá er umræða GPS-lausnir og hún hefur verið í gangi lengi, ekki bara erlendis, þetta líka hér. Eins og kom fram áðan, þetta var í samgöngu 2007 til 2018. En það er ekki mörg dæmi þetta í raun nema þá þetta Singapore dæmi sem eftir sé ekki næsta og opna á næsta ári. sem að það bara eitthvað sem að við verðum að fylgjast með og skoða, og það mjög áhugavert til þess að heyra þetta að Norðmenn sé að stefna þessu fyrir árið 2025, og það eitthvað sem við munum vafalaust fylgjast vel með. En ég hef ekki meira fram að færa í dag að þessu sinni. Ég vona bara að þetta hafi hjálpað. Bara takk áhöruna. Takk fyrir mig.
Takk fyrir þetta, Árni. Þetta var mjög áhugavert að sjá aðeins íslenska samhengi í þetta. And I'm going to change back to English for our foreign presenters to be able to follow. We've now just heard a bit about the Icelandic history and what road tolls we have had here in the past and at present, and what plans are for the future. But at the moment there are no questions. Nobody keen to know anything more out there. I have a few questions for you guys. I just wanted to ask about the public referendum that was in Stockholm, but you did not have such a referendum in Gothenburg, did you? Or did you? Per? And it's the same for Kjell. I guess you didn't have that in Norway, since the opposition seems to be more.
Thank you, Lilja, for the questions about public referendums in Sweden related to congestion charges. In Stockholm, they planned to have a public referendum 1 year after they started the congestion charges as a trial. So they began with I don't remember if it was 8 or 9 months with congestion charges running, and then they turned it off for a month, and then there was a public referendum leading to a yes in Stockholm. In Gothenburg, the idea was, I would say now stupidly enough, we thought that congestion charges is not a topic. It was a yes in Stockholm. Let's do it in Gothenburg. So the political leadership, they didn't plan for a public referendum, but in 2011, just during the planning phase of congestion charges in Gothenburg, there was a change in the law that if you can gather 5% of the voters signing a petition locally that they want a public referendum, the local government has to arrange such a public referendum. And there was absolutely no problem gathering 5% of the Gothenburgers to sign a petition about that. I think it was like 15% without any trouble. So there was a forced public referendum 1 year after we started the congestion tax in Gothenburg. It was a clear no in that, but still the public referendum on local level in Sweden are only advisory. It's not compulsory for the leadership to follow that. So in Gothenburg they said thank you. We will not listen to your advice in this term. Okay, and Kjell?
No, we haven't had a referendum over these issues in Norway. Okay. However, the massive protests last year resulted in that in the Stavanger region, where they started, implemented a toll system, toll rings, planned and implemented. I think it was some prices similar to those I showed for Bergen, much higher prices during the rush hours. But the protests were so massive that the authority backed off, and it isn't implemented actually. But the way it's in Norway, we have had toll rings in 10 or 12 cities altogether. And the way or the reason the way it has been possible to implement it is simply that the state, in some respects, can hold local authorities, both at the municipality level and at the county level, are kind of hostage. If you come up with some own financing, you get state funds for your projects. So that's the broad path that have made it possible to implement all these schemes in Norway.
Thank you very much. We have one question regarding the kilometer pricing or the GPS-based pricing. I'm not sure who wants to answer that. Árni said that the only city in the world opening such a scheme up is in Singapore. But I don't know who
I think this question is about odometer reading.
Oh, okay.
Paying for kilometers that you drive. This is an idea that has been that exists and is being looked into. Absolutely. There was a bit of this option had a bit of a hit 2 years ago. If you can remember, there was a cheating or like a scam discovery from one car rental who was changing their odometers of the cars. But this method has many positive. I mean, in many ways, it's positive. It's very simple. It's rather cheap to implement. You have the cars have to go regularly for inspection, so you already have a kind of checkup that is needed to verify what people are reporting. You can think of a system similar to the way we report our use of geothermal water or electricity, where people report on their own how much kilometers they are driving. There is cheating option, obviously. You can fight that through law by having some kind of penalties. There is also cheating on other kind of taxes. People. That's why we have the Ríkisskattstjóri.
Yeah, the tax authority.
The tax authority. So, but I think the what you call a common kilometer price might be or is probably a very good option until we don't have a feasible GPS scheme.
Okay, Kjell, you have something to add to that?
Just a comment on that kilometer charges. Actually, we had kilometer charges in Norway until 1993 for diesel vehicles. All diesel vehicles, it was very low tax on the diesel fuel, but diesel vehicles had to have an extra odometer that was sealed and controlled once a year by Veggjöld. And I think it was due to one formality when we were going to enter the new deal with the EU from '94. It wasn't allowed more, and of course for practical reasons. Until the early 90s, almost all passengers' cars were run by petrol engine, and diesel was only a few taxis and big cars, so it was mainly for heavy vehicles, pay the kilometer tax by an odometer. So it's and with new technology, it should be simple if we can solve the legal problems with to protect personal data. The Datatilsynet in Norway, I don't know their English name, it's an Inspectorate for Data Security, etc. They have actually gone into this issue with us, and in their opinion, it's possible to find a system that takes care of personal data There has to be a wall between the information about the individual trips and movements and the payment. And I think that's the case also in Singapore, where you have to put a card into a device in your car, and your account are, yeah.
What about you, Per? Do you have a view on this?
Yes, I think so. Firstly, as Kjell was talking a bit about, I think in a general way, kilometer fees are coming on a wide range, and that's due to the electrification of vehicles will lead to a drop in public finance from the previous gasoline and diesel taxes. So in a general sense, I think that a kilometer tax or a fee are coming for all journeys, not only in cities. And I know we are discussing it in Sweden. I know they have upfront coming in Denmark, quite close to regulation, I think. And in Holland, Netherlands, they are also discussing this. And if you have this general fee of per kilometer, of course you can have it a little bit higher in city cores at special times. But then it has to be registered when every car is in the city and at which times. I think, as Kjell also says, that it's a topic about personal integrity, that the state will collect data about where your car is at every second, and that could be used for wrong purposes in the end. And actually, in Sweden, we have camera systems taking photos of the front of and the back of each car passing the toll stations. And the data regulation says that these photos have to be shrimped to only show the register plate, even before the image file leaves the portal. It are not accepted to touch the ground digitally before it has to be cut to only show the register plate, because the state hasn't have to understand if you have your mistress in the car or something else. That's an integrity level. But this was the decisions in legal 15 years ago. This was set as a requirement for the Swedish congestion tax systems. Nowadays, we share a huge amount of data with Google and Facebook, etc. I don't know if that is relevant anymore, these kind of topics. But still, I think it might be relevant that it might be hard to predict when you start your journey to understand how much will I pay today. If you have a system where very, very sophisticated, that it will go up and down for every 15 minutes, and it will be higher in the core of the city and a little bit less in halfway, in etc. And as Tom, who has left us now, mentioned, to understand how a system works is quite relevant for acceptance.
Okay. Yes, and that maybe relates to the communication. But sorry, Kjell, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think that's important, that it has to be easy to understand this system, because if you don't understand what you pay and when you pay, it's not working as at our economists' tables. But I have another issue, and I don't know if you are informed, but there are some trials in Norway with low emission zones for heavy vehicles, using a kind of geofencing by GPS. And then for heavy vehicles, professional transport, issue of personal data isn't that strict. That can be implemented with that. it's prohibited for lower Euro classes than Euro 5, or it can be a differentiated fee for different kinds of heavy vehicles, and these could also be time differentiated to take care of deliveries to shops, etc. So that's a cheap technology, at least.
Yes, and one would expect that in the coming years we would see more of these kinds of projects and experimental projects, since the European Union is pushing for more solutions in that direction. But in connection with what we just discussed, I think we're close to the communication package again, because you talked very much about the need for transparency, that you see that people, like you said, understand the tolls they're paying and what the money is being used. But I noticed in Árni Freyr's presentation that the Icelandic legal system, at least I don't know if it's the same abroad, and when you're dealing with congestion charging, it is as a tax, and then it goes directly into the state box for it, and then it becomes maybe unclear for people what the money is being used for. How is that in Sweden and Norway? Is that the same for the congestion part of it? Per, if you start.
Yes, we have the same constitutional system that it has been decided 17 years ago that taking fees for congestion is a national tax, and the national tax cannot be designated to a specific cost. That's the basis, and that's a problem in this sense, because, as you said, it's important for acceptance to know where the congestion tax revenues will land in the end. But the Swedish state has, I don't know, they have been criticized for it, but they have signed a civil agreement with the municipality of Gothenburg and the regional of West Sweden, that the exact amount that they will receive in net revenues from the congestion tax in Gothenburg will be put in infrastructure in our area. So they have arranged it by just a business agreement, more or less.
Okay.
In Norway,
how is that in Norway?
Specific. So it's all the revenues has to be used for the project within the package.
Okay.
And these packages are operated normally by the State Road Directorate on behalf of local and regional authorities.
Okay, and that's maybe to you, Árni, maybe the same that we are trying to do here with our new transport package.
Yeah. So basically, we want the money that would be collected to go into building of infrastructure here, and there's no reason to believe that it won't be so. But it is this risk every year that, because of this and that reason, the Parliament would not agree to reallocate the money again here, because they will have to decide every year. The repayments are always based on, would maybe never be exactly the same, because they're always based on estimate, because they have to be decided so much beforehand. But yeah, we in general we only have these kind of two options. It's either a service fee or it's a tax, and the service fee has to be for a given service and for the real cost of the service. So,
but could the service be what you call it, not a physical thing or a concrete service, but better traffic conditions due to congestion charging? I think we have had this discussion in Norway. You know, we have probably heard that Norway some Norwegian and Americans found some oil and gas in the North Sea, and then the money poured into us, and we have had this fund as with a strict rule that tells us how much of these money can be used for general purposes. Purposes. And we have discussed we should have a similar rule for pricing, for congestion pricing or road pricing, that the prices should be set on a basis to cover the cost, and road pricing taking care of congestion should be set to meet some criteria for traffic flows or delays in the traffic system, and not be used for annual budgeting of public budgets. That might make it easier to get acceptance.
Yes, it's at least clear that we can seek guidance from you guys when we get further into this discussion here in Iceland. But we are running out of time. We have only 5 minutes left, and don't
Can
seem
I
to be
add
any
one
more
question?
questions. So yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm interested in here in Iceland. We have road tolls in 1 tunnels up north. You use license plate cameras, but the tourists in tourist cars, we are missing them often. How do you charge them, like in Gothenburg, and also the rental cars, but also the international traffic?
An easy answer to that is that there are a few companies globally that takes care of it. So when a couple of times a year, I'm taking my car with my dogs to Stockholm, and 3 weeks later I get an invoice in my mailbox with that I have to pay 23 kroner or something.
In Sweden, we both the Stockholm system and the Gothenburg system started only targeting Swedish vehicles. Rental car wasn't a real problem. The government was quite tough, saying that the rental company has to pay it, and of course they made a system for put that kind of cost forward to the end client, so it wasn't really a big deal. In 2016, we widened the scope of which kind of cars that are subject to taxation to all countries, actually, and it has been more and more effective within the European Union for authorities to share information about license plates. So the transaction costs for getting payment from a car from Latvia or Poland or Italy or Spain is reducing every year, but it's still very, very, very high. It's bad business from a business perspective for the Swedish state to have this kind of hunt for the foreign cars, but it's a matter of fairness and justice towards the Swedish cars, because we saw a lot of Swedes buying Norwegian cars and use them for half a year before they sell it back to Norway, and by that not paying congestion taxes.
You can always find ways. Yes. Well, I think there's one last question, and I'm going to take that one in Icelandic since it is a more political question, I guess. Varðandi söguna aðkomu ráðherranna, þá var Ögmundur ekki fráhverfur stefnu ríkisstjórnar Jóhannum vegtolla á helstu vegi út frá Reykjavík þar til hann tók á móti 41.500 undirskriftum sem safnað var á einni viku gegn vegtollum í janúar 2011. Árni, getur þú sem sögumaður veist eitthvað þetta?
Þetta bara, ég bara takk fyrir þetta. Ég meina, hann allavega, ég gæti ekki á tíman.is fundið hann skrifa grein eða segi viðtalan væri að hann styddi svona hugmyndir, en þetta er alveg rétt að hann tók við einhverjum hugmyndum hvort að gjaldtaka yfir Hellisheiðina. sem síðan varð ekkert úr. Þannig og örugglega ekki síst út af þessum undirskriftum. En allavega, þetta alveg rétt, Ögmundur allavega hérna, hann skrifa allavega ekki undir þessi lög valaðagang.
Heyrðu, á þessum nótum held ég að hérna sé bara vera fínt. I'm going to switch over to English again, and we are finishing this off now, and I would really like to thank the presenters especially for giving us their time to inform us about this interesting subject. And I would also like to thank all the guests that followed, and I hope you learned something new today. And thank you on behalf of ITS Iceland. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for my bed. Bye.